Hi guys, seeing we're still in post-election mode, I thought I might just hit you with another election rave, a political rave. Hope I don't bore the crap out of you with this one. But I've done a little bit of digging and especially on our local member here who just got re-elected, and that is Warren Entsch. Now I found out a few facts about Warren. I went through a bit of history, so this might be a bit enlightening for a few people who don't know much about the guy. In the Cairns Post just recently, he was featured, his major mission after this election was to rid the ocean of refuse, plastic in particular. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's all good and well. No one wants rubbish in the ocean. That's fair enough. But is that really your number one priority? And it made me sort of wonder, what are Warren Entsch's priorities? And after a bit of digging, I found out he's pretty small L liberal in a lot of stances. And I think that this is where his heart lies. It's with issues such as that and gay marriage. And I have no problem with that, by the way, but it's not a top priority in my book. I have absolutely no problem that it got through, but that's not the point. The point is, what is important right now is things like water conservation, in other words, building dams so we can actually develop this part of the country, and getting cheap power, and that would probably include coal-fired power in the interim. And I want to emphasise that in the interim because I've done a bit of digging on that as well and discovered some interesting facts, and it has actually changed my own perception of where that fits in the mix of energy that we have available. So it's good to do a bit of research, and it can broaden your mind. And I don't go through to lobby groups and people with agendas. I actually went to an engineering site, Engineers Australia, and I got some major facts there, and it did become quite enlightening for me. But I'll pass it on to you a little later. But I think those facts are interesting. In the case of Warren Entsch, medical marijuana, I don't necessarily have a problem with that either, but again, not top priority. He's just one of 11 Liberal MPs to actually vote for Julie Bishop in the August leadership poll last year, the leadership spill. Now, so that's interesting in itself. He would have voted for Scott Morrison, as colleagues emphatically rejected her declaration she would have beaten Bill Shorten at the upcoming election. So now, in retrospect, Warren now is saying that he would have actually supported Morrison. Well, I think that's just very convenient politically. So I'm very suspicious of that turnaround. Quite convenient. And being a politician, trust levels in Warren for me aren't that great. He has to earn trust. And so I think it also shows that he's where he's coming from politically. He would be regarded in UK politics, or Margaret Thatcher would have called him a wet. And we have had plenty of rain up here, so maybe that seems appropriate, but I think maybe we need someone a little more to the centre of politics rather than those leftist tendencies, but that's just my opinion. Guardian Australia on the 4th of March said that Entsch, the Liberal incumbent in North Queensland's seat of Leichhardt, either didn't get the Greens' will never darken our door memo, or if he did, he ignored it because he was sending preferences their way. And that's pretty dodgy too. I mean, the Greens are not someone if I was a true Liberal, really should be putting them right down the bottom of the list, I would have thought. They're not the sort of people that have much in common with what should be that broad church of the Liberal Party. So that's disappointing too. Apparently they haven't reciprocated. They were putting Labor first, but Entsch, who is said almost universally to be in trouble in this contest, told me this week climate change is such a potent issue in his neck of the woods that it would have been self-defeating for him to do anything other than make the gesture. So it sounds like he is an adherent to the climate change cult. And in the last election, 20% of Greens preferences came his way. He says because it is socially progressive. He was one of the leaders of the push to legislate same-sex marriage, and as he puts it, with typical bluntness, I'm committed conservationist. I am not a climate change denier. And that is a classic example of someone shoved into the left Greens category. He would actually fit into the Labor Party with those policies quite neatly, so that's a worry too. Now, of course, that was something written a little while back because he was perceived as being in trouble, but of course the polls totally underestimated the push for the Liberal Party. Climate change damage to Queensland's World Heritage rainforest as bad as Great Barrier Reef. Climate change in Entsch's part of the world is divisive locally because tourism operators are in conflict with anti-fossil fuel activists obsessed with the health of the Great Barrier Reef. But whatever the nuances and conflicts, it's a front of the mind preoccupation of his constituents. And that's true. There is a lot of division there, but he's obviously decided to go on the green side of the equation. And again, that worries me. The federal government's $5 billion Northern Australian infrastructure facility has accelerated its funding of projects throughout regional areas before the election. Big surprise there that occurred. Now, more than $1.3 billion has been spent on 10 projects in North Queensland, the Northern Territory and the northern half of Western Australia. And more money is expected to be pushed out of the door before the end of the financial year. Well, I should say so because this particular organisation has been around for some time, many years, and only a small proportion of money has been spent. And I don't know what the delay is. I mean, development is required. Get off your asses and make some funding decisions. I mean, it's just pathetic. So I give them a big cross on this particular government organisation. It seems like maybe it's been designed to employ more bureaucrats rather than to actually get the job done. And this is something that I want to see change with the Liberal Party. I want to see more action, less bureaucracy, less words. And on the international front, recently we've had some rather good news in my opinion, and that is that that Theresa May has finally resigned. Of course, not immediately. Nothing's done immediately. She's going to wait until after the Trump visit, the state visit by President Trump. The Conservative Party in Britain must be one of the most dysfunctional political entities that's ever existed. Not only have they totally botched Brexit, but Theresa May is hanging on like a rotting corpse to meet with Trump when he visits the UK next month. This is the same Trump who holds her in utter contempt. Seriously, this woman is an absolute masochist. She must be. She's clueless and masochistic, and I will not miss her. However, Alan Jones from 2GB thinks Theresa May is some sort of a heroine, a gutsy lady. Totally bizarre in my opinion. Mind you, nothing that the press says surprises me these days. Anyone who has an opinion to the right of Joseph Stalin is labelled with the smear far right. Funny how you hardly ever hear the term far left from activists masquerading as journalists in Australia. These ideologues have trashed the profession of journalism and hastened their own demise as public trust in the media plummets. By the way, the local media here in Cairns labelled Warren Entsch as the Lion of Leichhardt. Believe it or not. And now, just finally, I'd like to actually talk about the energy situation and what I've actually discovered after looking at this Engineering Australian PDF report. What was interesting is that actually Queensland is in a much better position than the rest of Australia in that the coal-fired power stations that have been built up here are much more modern than the counterparts down south. A coal-fired station takes 5 years to build and has an expected running life of about 40 years. And I think that the oldest one in Queensland was built in about the mid-90s. I've got a list here I can put up on screen so you can actually check it out. But you can see how there are quite a few ageing coal-fired power stations. Now, obviously, the newer versions of these coal-fired power stations will be better, but renewable energy is dropping in price. And that's what the conservationists always keep pushing, the Greens especially. But the problem, what they omit to mention is that wind and solar aren't 24 hours a day base load power. So for them to really be effective, we're going to need cheap and reliable battery backups. And that doesn't really exist at this stage. It's not cheap, that's for sure. It will get cheaper, and at some stage coal will be pushed out of the equation. There's no doubt about that. And I won't be shedding too many tears on that front either. I mean, I do want clean power, but I want it to be reliable and I want it to be cheap. And at the moment, the inner city elites, the Greens, they basically are championing a technology that isn't mature yet and means that we're all paying a lot more for our electricity. And that is really hard on the poor. And that is one reason why the Labor Party is losing a lot of votes, because that's their constituent, used to be their constituent, the poor battlers, but now they've become the battlers like the Howard battlers that have been taken over by the Liberals, and Morrison's doing exactly the same thing. That's part of the constituency that's basically switched over to Liberals, because Labor and the Greens are for inner city elites these days. So they've really lost it. But what I found interesting is that it's not as simple as just building a whole lot of coal-fired power stations. Mind you, you've still got to wait those 5 years, so I don't know how we're going to cope in the interim. I think the way that they're looking at it is through gas, which costs more but is relatively clean. But it is only going to be cheap if we have a reserve for Australian use, so we're not paying international prices for the gas, which is absolutely killing us. So we have to pay cheaper prices for the gas, and that will probably save us in the interim. And that's what apparently the Liberals are looking at right now. And this could actually save a fair few industries and the economy quite a bit of pain. But I still think we need to build some coal-fired power stations, but I'm not as gung-ho as I was after looking at that report, because they may be pretty well obsolete way before the 40-year period is over. We could build a nuclear power station if we had the common sense to do it, but we're like frightened children in this country. We've outlawed nuclear power, which is insane, because we're quite happy to make money exporting yellow cake overseas for other countries to use nuclear power. So basically, that's not an option at this stage unless we have a gutsy government, and I don't think we've got one right now. The Liberals aren't, when you've got the likes of Warren Entsch in your lineup, it makes you realise that there are a lot of wets in the Liberal Party, and they are like scared children. They won't even countenance that type of technology, and that's a problem. So basically the options are, we've got to build coal in the short term. We could have, for peak demand, you can use hydro, pumped hydro, but that's expensive, and I think that the Snowy Mountains 2 scheme is insane, so that's a really expensive way of providing extra clean energy. And I have my doubts about the economic viability of it, and it does make me question mark the sanity of the Liberals with that particular project. That was one that, of course, Malcolm Toxic Turnbull championed, and anything that's got his name on it is sus in my opinion. So that's where we are. But look, this report is really enlightening, and it does show that renewables are getting cheaper, but again, we're not comparing apples with apples. To compare apples with apples, you have to look at a form of energy that you can switch on 24 hours a day, and you cannot do that with solar or wind power until you get a battery backup, because neither of those are going to be producing electricity 24 hours a day. As a matter of fact, I think wind is actually, in some cases, you might only get 10 or 20% productivity out of them. So it's, there's a lot of things to take into consideration, and the same occurs with solar. Of course, it may be cheap to manufacture these days, although that money for both of those products is going to China. We don't build those things, and that's also a disgrace. And of course, the way we make our industries less competitive with high cost electricity, there's even less chance of us producing any manufacturing things. So we're in a real bind that way. So let's have some sanity in this country, and let's have a sensible mix of technologies, and let's get the price of electricity down. I think at least the Liberals are trying to do that, and fingers crossed it happens, because a lot of people who can least afford it are really hurting at the moment with electricity prices going through the roof.